Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 144 different nations looking for the 1,000 best practices, the technologies, the services, and the products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And also we're looking for the people that are bringing real change to a planet that's going from over 7 billion to almost 9 billion people by 2050, and how we're going to bring about an increased quality of life so that people are not just existing but actually having a real quality of life. That means they have access to all the basic infrastructure, the food, the water, the energy, healthcare, and education that they need. A gentleman sitting right beside me has been working on these issues for a long time. It's Robert Bob Walker, who is the president of the Population Institute, sitting right beside me here in the studio. And Bob, welcome to the Emerald Planet.
Sam, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you here, and we have your logo up. Tell us a little about what is the Population Institute?
Well, first of all, the Population Institute was established in 1969. Originally, we were working actually on family planning here in the United States, particularly the creation of Title X, which provides family planning assistance to low-income households here in the United States. But for most of our history over the past 4 decades, we've been working on international family planning. We've been educating the general public, media, opinion leaders, and policymakers both at home and abroad about the challenges related to population growth, but also about the benefits of family planning and reproductive health.
Now, looking at the whole notion, many people are saying the fertility rates are actually dropping, particularly in middle-income states like Mexico now that's dropped dramatically, and population growth seems to be not expanding as rapidly as it once was. But what's your answer to those two observations?
Well, first of all, family planning is one of the great success stories of the 20th century. When I was born in 1951, women on average across the globe had 5 children. Today, it's much closer to about 2.5 children. So in many ways, it's a great success story. But what we've seen in the 21st century thus far is that fertility rates are not dropping as fast as previously projected. When you go back to the year 2000, I'd like to do this. You look at the quotes that were made about population back then. People were warning about a global birth dearth. There were concerns that we would have a shrinking global population by mid-century. Well, that's not turned out to be the case. In fact, what we're seeing is that fertility rates are not declining as fast as previously projected. And in fact, as a result of that, population projections are on the rise right now around the world. One of the things that we're seeing, particularly I think of note, is that in the least developing countries, where population growth rates really today are the highest, we're actually seeing increases in the adolescent pregnancy rate, for example. So a lot of the progress that we've made in reducing population growth it's still there. But there are some warning signs out there that suggest that the population projections that we were counting upon may not materialize.
Well, the one thing that we really haven't chatted about directly, but this whole notion of child brides, is increasing as the economy are changing and had decreased over the last 5 or 6 years. Right. Also, the droughts that are going on, so people are less able to produce food, so they're literally selling their children. Going into other families. Yep. And then also this myth about HIV/AIDS, that if you're with young females for men, and then there's not the incidence of having AIDS. So you have a number of these myths, a number of these social pressures that are going on around the globe. How are these being addressed vis-a-vis the more scientific ideas and approach about population control? And in many countries, actually, it's called child spacing.
Right. Well, when you take a look at the countries in the world today that are growing the most rapidly, I think it's primarily located in what we call the least developed countries. And in many of these countries, these are male-dominated societies. Very often, child marriage is prevalent, particularly in rural areas. Let's talk about what we mean by child marriage. In some cases, this means that a girl will be married at the age of 9 or 10. And so that's a very significant challenge. It's a challenge in many respects. First of all, it's a violation of human rights. But leaving aside that question for a moment, it certainly relates to projected fertility rates, that it's really not realistic to talk about reproductive choice for a girl or a very young woman who is in her teens, who is married and really has no choice in how many children she's going to have. And that's one of the reasons why fertility rates are not falling as fast as previously projected. So we do face some cultural barriers that I think are very, very significant, and we're going to talk about that later in the program, I hope. But it's one of the issues that we really need to think about very hard.
Well, looking at population expansion, this is something, this debate, as you were talking about, Bob, in the early 2000s, where there may be a decline in population. And in some populations, that's actually happening, particularly in North America, Europe, some countries in Asia within certain ethnicities. But other ethnicities, of course, there's still expansion of population in the United States would be on decline if it wasn't for immigration.
True.
And we continue to expand. We're almost 820 million people within the United States.
We're seeing clearly in some parts of the world, in Eastern Europe in particular, and some parts of East Asia, where population either is now in decline or will soon be in decline.
Such as Russia is a classic example.
And Russia is a classic example of that. The United States, as you indicate, we have about 315 million people in the country today, and our population will probably grow over the next 37, 38 years to around 410 million, 420 million, estimates vary. Most of that is attributable to immigration, but not exclusively. But what we're really seeing is that, let's talk about global population, because I think those numbers are really, really important. Right now, we have 7.2 billion people on the planet. And what we're anticipating is that that number will grow to 9.6 billion by mid-century.
Yeah, 2050, and that's what we've been projecting. Here as far as Emerald Planet is concerned, that's what we're seeing, about 9 billion. But what is the link between population growth and the environment? This is the thing that we're rolling back into the green topics that we have. But there real is impact as far as the natural resources, land, water, all the basic necessities that humans need.
Well, population growth is the single greatest environmental challenge that we face on the planet today. We face obviously a lot of environmental challenges, but most of them relate in some way or another back to human numbers. And let's remember, of course, that the Emerald Planet is a finite planet. It has finite resources. By some estimates, right now, we're using 150% of the Earth's regenerative capacity in terms of biophysical capacity.
Now, let's say that again, because I think that's important for our audiences here and abroad to hear.
Right now, we are using 150% of the Earth's renewable capacity. We're talking about things like soil, we're talking about water, we're talking about the absorption capacity for carbon dioxide.
Like forestry, fisheries, and all that.
Forestry, fisheries, all those different things. So, and there are estimates indicating that by the year 2030, we're going to need 2 emerald planets. And of course, we don't have those. So there are a lot of environmental factors that go, and let me just mention a couple of them that I think should be, all of these are related to population.
And then we're going to tie that directly into climate change.
Sure. And we'll talk more about climate change later, I think, particularly in the second segment with your next guest. But, population growth is very closely related to water scarcity. In many parts of the world today, we're seeing that lakes are shrinking. We're seeing that rivers, major rivers, oftentimes don't flow to the oceans anymore. They're just a dribble by the time they get there. We're seeing underground aquifers. All across the world, the water tables are dropping. Deforestation is a significant challenge, certainly with respect to climate change, but also with respect to the local environment. We're seeing erosion of topsoil in many parts of the world because of intensive agriculture, and deforestation is a very, very significant challenge. Again, it's all pretty much related to population. And then there's loss of biodiversity. Scientists, biologists are saying that we now face the world's 6th mass extinction, the greatest extinction of plant and animal species since the dinosaurs were destroyed 65 million years ago by an asteroid. course, it's not an asteroid. It's we human beings that are responsible for that.
We're actually the asteroids.
We are the asteroid. We are that comet.
But looking at that, Bob, we've talked about all this happy news about, the decline of biodiversity and the forests and the fisheries and all that. But at the same time, the number of organizations like yours and others, Emerald Planet, are doing things about that. So what is being done to try to arrest or maybe even reverse some of these negative impacts as far as climate change and the population is concerned?
Sure. Well, let's talk about population. And going back to the earlier comment I made, I think family planning is one of the great success stories of the 20th century, and it can be a great success story in the 21st century as well. The problem is that we are seeing over the last 20 years a real decline in the amount of resources given by the United States and other donor countries to support international family planning. We've seen a little bit of rebound in that. There was a London Family Planning Summit last year where a number of nations committed to increase their support for international family planning. But, we got to see that money delivered. It's got to come through. It's not a lot of money. There are 220 million women in the developing world today who want to avoid a pregnancy, but who are not using a modern method of contraception.
Well, the thing about that, Bob, is that you have national policies, whether it's the United States and other countries, really are saying we need to throttle back on some of the family planning and some of the protection for contraceptives and all that.
We're seeing
what are we going to do about balancing that so that actually monies are going in to reduce the population pressures instead of trying to deal with putting in more roads and more canals and sanitation systems, which are huge costs. I mean, this is in the trillions of dollars that's needed to develop the infrastructure.
There's a huge price tag associated with population growth. And let's go back to the United States just for example, because a lot of our attention is on international family planning. But right today, here in the United States, we're seeing family planning clinics closed in Texas. Why? Because the state of Texas cut back by 2/3 its support for family planning clinics in that state. That's a travesty that in the United States, we have women, particularly women in low-income households, who no longer have access to a family planning clinic in their neighborhoods. That's shocking. But it's also a global problem. Now, but the one thing I want to mention is it's not just a lack of access to contraceptives. That when we talk about population, it's really important to realize that we're also talking about issues like child marriage in the developing world. We're talking about the need to empower women, the need to have girls remain in school. And so there's a whole lot of issues we have to deal with.
Absolutely. There's a tremendous number of issues, and we've just absolutely run out of time. 15 seconds, what do you see for the Population Institute over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, we're going to work a lot to find out what are the most effective way of really addressing these population pressures. And a lot of it has to deal with issues like child marriage and the cultural factors that contribute to high fertility.
Thank you for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.
Art, a universal language,
Good job.
expression of culture,
Nicely done.
of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs or to make a tax-free donation, contact C. Fripp at AOL.com.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read. and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America and Reading is Fundamental.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you as we look for those 1,000 best practices, the technologies, the services, and the products, and also the people are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And we're looking at this notion of increased population and how we're going from 7 to almost 9 billion souls, maybe even more than 9 billion souls by 2050. So how are we going to provide the basic infrastructure, the food, the water, the energy, healthcare, and education that's a necessity to have any type of quality of life on the planet? And one of those ways is actually to look at the increases of population, particularly in LDCs, least developed countries, and how they're going to be able to address it, and how the developed world needs to expand its influence, but also at the same time the resources that it has to address this big issue. We have someone that's actively working in this with a number of organizations. This is Kathleen Mogelgaard. She is a senior advisor for the Population Action International. Also, she is a consultant with an organization that I spend a lot of time with and support wholeheartedly, the Woodrow Wilson Center, and she's involved with the Environmental Change and Security Program, and then also with Oxfam America on the Climate Change Policy Committee there. So Kathleen, you're very busy, and I don't know how you ever get any sleep. My goodness. Welcome to the Emerald Planet.
To be here.
Well, thank you for joining us, and I have sitting beside us our mutual friend. This is Bob Walker, who you know very well.
Kathleen.
And he's here in case we lose you by Skype, even though you're here in Washington, D.C., across not too far from us. We glad to have you here with us. But tell us a little bit about the Population Action International, and then if you could weave in the Woodrow Wilson Center and the work that you're doing there.
Sure. Well, Population Action International is a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., and I think they're one of the leading organizations doing work on this issue of how population growth and other demographic changes relate to a lot of the major global challenges we're facing in the world today: environmental challenges, economic development challenges, health challenges, security challenges. Population Action International is one of those groups that does a lot of work to help us better understand what the connections are among these challenges, and then helps us to think about how we can do advocacy and communication to help us develop solutions to these challenges that are truly integrated and can get us on a better path towards global sustainability.
Well, we bring up this slide right now, Kathleen, that you provided for us, and this is all about population and the challenges. And of course, on Emerald Planet, we say we're the good news team, so we're looking for the solutions. So tell us a little bit about what this chart actually means, and then we'll weave in the solutions to some of the things that we're actually talking about.
Sure. Well, as I think Bob outlined very well in the first segment to the program this evening, population is an issue that connects to so many of the things that we care about in this world. We do live on a planet of limited resources. We live within some natural constraints. And so as population continues to grow, and it continues to grow very rapidly still in some parts of the world, we are running up against certain local and global constraints. And when we're able to slow population growth by doing something as basic as providing women and families with the tools and information they need to decide whether and when to have children, in my mind, and I think for a lot of us, we feel like this is a good news story, that by meeting women's existing needs for reproductive health information and family planning services, we can help to put ourselves on a path toward addressing some of the development challenges, like health care for everyone, like greater educational opportunities for everyone, like reduced pressure on the natural resources that sustain us. By doing these things in connection with each other, it can be a very good news story.
Well, looking at the research that you've done and the extensive experience you have with a number of organizations, you've really been balancing population, climate change, and the environment, these three different topics. So how are you able to balance those, and what are you seeing from your research has happened, say, over the last 15, 20 years, and what are you projecting over the next 15 to 20 years as we do move towards 2050?
Yeah, that's a really big question, Sam, and I'm glad that you posed it. Over the last several years, I've become incredibly interested in the issue of climate change in particular. And I think a lot of us are beginning to fully understand how serious the climate change challenge is, not only as an environmental issue, but as an issue that affects basic human well-being and sustainability into the future. The World Bank released a report this summer that talked about how if we're not going to be able to really seriously address the issue of climate change, we're not going to be able to address poverty around the world. It's as simple as that. So many of us around the planet rely so heavily on the natural world that when we start to really see the kinds of big changes that are coming with climate change, things like more erratic weather patterns, shifting rainfall that has huge impacts on agricultural productivity. These are the kinds of challenges that are going to make it extremely difficult to address some of the basic human needs and poverty alleviation goals that we have moving forward. So in terms of thinking about addressing the climate change challenge, I think for a long time, people have thought about climate change as an environmental issue that had technical solutions. But we're beginning to understand better and better, I think, that addressing climate change is also a social issue. And that's where some of the issues that Bob was raising earlier about women's empowerment, about strengthening communities, all of these things are going to be critical as we address the climate change challenge moving forward. Not only is that important for reducing the climate change pollution, the greenhouse gas pollution that is creating the challenge of climate change, but also to adapting to the kinds of impacts that we're already seeing. I was recently in Senegal looking at some of the hunger and food security initiatives that are happening there. And it's very clear that erratic weather patterns are already really posing a lot of challenges for the agriculture sector in Senegal. And about 80% of the population in Senegal is directly reliant on rain-fed agriculture. So this is creating major challenges for food security in Senegal. And as it turns out, Senegal is also a country that is experiencing rapid population growth. Its population right now is about 13 million people. By 2050, that 13 million people could grow to 33 million. And if they are already experiencing challenges with hunger and food security, that kind of rapid population growth, along with the kinds of climate changes that they're experiencing in that part of Africa, are really creating a magnified challenge.
Well, Kathleen, looking at the family planning, environmental challenges, and also climate change, many countries are looking at these really as disparate issues, and I think you indicated that in the information you were sharing with us just a moment ago. But yet these are all very much intertwined, and it takes, as I was reading one of the research papers, for every 1% population growth, you need about a 12.5% increase in GDP to be able to provide the basic infrastructure, to take care of these people. And this could be in the hundreds of millions, billions, even trillions of dollars, depending on the population and the country and the size of the existing infrastructure. So how can you impress upon planners and elected leaders within these countries that they need to look upon family planning but population growth as integral to everything they want to be as a nation, and how they're going to progress as we move towards 2050?
I think that's a challenge.
I think Kathleen, I've lost you on
of international development.
Okay.
Tends to be fairly siloed. The hunger people and the health people work on health issues.
We're having problems with the Skype. Bob, looking at this issue as far as family planning, population, and then the future as far as these developing nations, and having a real sound infrastructure to take care of the people are going to have. People are going to be here whether they're ready for them or not.
Yeah, I think one of the great challenges that we face with respect to climate change is not only mitigation. One of the issues that Kathleen Mogelgaard has done so much work on, and it's been the focus of a lot of our work in the developing world, is really on this issue about adaptation. How are developing countries going to adjust to the challenges related to climate change, whether it be drought, or whether it be flooding, or whether it be rising seas, or whatever it happens to be? How are they going to make those adjustments? And one of the factors that countries are now beginning to focus in on is the need to make sure they have a robust family planning program in place, because that's going to be one of the critical ways in their adaptation strategy. But this has still got a long ways to go. This is an education process.
Well, it's an educational process, and at the same time, Bob, as we've been talking, it really is resources allocation. It's not just natural resources, you know, the water, the food, the fuel that we think of, but it really is the thrust of the national budgets that these countries have and how they're looking at it. And it's not just spending more money, it's not working harder, but it's really working smarter. So we're looking at population and managing population growth. How do we work smarter and not just harder and just spending money?
Well, as I said before in the earlier segment, we have 220 million women in the developing world who we know from surveys want to avoid a pregnancy but who are not using a modern method of contraception. And it would cost only about $3.5 billion a year more in additional assistance to render family planning assistance to those women. So that is a very small investment. It's one that we can help developing countries make, and that in itself would make a terrific difference. But we also have this human rights problem, going back to child marriage, going back to the status of women, because that really is fundamental, and not just from the standpoint of fertility rates. It really has to do with, if we really want to bring these countries along, and if they're going to break the cycle of poverty and hunger, we have to focus a lot on gender equity.
Yeah, I think that's really very important, and that we're trying to get Kathleen Mogelgaard, who's just done fantastic work around the globe, and she's worked with you and is a trusted, and she's also senior advisor for the Population Action International. Sorry to lose her, but Bob, that's why you're here. Glad to have you. Thank you for being with us as we create the Family Planet.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a rat, that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about 3,000 light. Nothing very nice. Holy fire. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home? I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals and the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent. Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from the United States, looking around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for the 1,000 best practices, the technologies, the services, the products, and of course the people are making a difference as we move towards 2050. We're looking at a planet that will soon have 9 billion souls, and how we're going to be able to take care of those people, but at the same time to alleviate some of the population pressure in LDCs, least developed countries, and to allow those people to really enter through the 21st century so that there's an increased quality of life for everybody that is on the planet. We have a gentleman who's been working with us for a number of years. William Bill Ryerson is the president of the Population Media Center, and also he's the chairman CEO for the Population Institute. And sitting right beside me in the studio is Robert Bob Walker, who is the president of the Population Institute. And he's here in case we lose our good friend who's now coming to us from New York and just arrived from Uganda, I believe, Bill. So
That's right.
You've come a long way to be on the Emerald Planet.
I did. Well, it was worth it, I'm sure.
Well, we're glad to have you, and you're doing incredible work. And I'm really interested in the work that you're doing as far as the Population Media Center. Tell us what that is, and then we'll get into the work that you're doing. And of course, we'll have Bob chime in from time to time as well.
Okay, good. Well, the Population Media Center, as the name implies, is working with the media, but particularly focused on entertainment media. We know from our own personal experiences that emotional involvement really enhances memory. And so if you have just intellectual information, a lot of people ignore it or find it not moving to them in terms of taking any change in behavior. But emotion-based programming like melodrama can be hugely effective in influencing people to adopt new behaviors. And so Population Media Center is using a strategy of long-running serialized melodramas in various countries, 47 so far, in which key characters very gradually evolve into role models for the audience for such goals as elevation of women's status, daughter education, use of family planning, HIV prevention, protection of children, child nutrition, and an array of other issues, including environmental protection. So these programs we have found to be very cost-effective at bringing about changes in social norms on the issues we're addressing in various countries.
Well, the attitudinal changes and also behavior is something that nation states are looking at as a very cost-effective means to bring positive change within the population, particularly in least developed nations where you have a rapidly expanding populations. And then you have the transitional states such as Mexico, Brazil, and others are middle income states. So you have different pressures in different societies. And I like your motto, acting for change, is part of that whole thing. But what kinds of entertainment media are we talking about, and how do you mix and match TV, radio, film, and now, of course, more and more social networking media?
All of these media are effective depending on what people are accessing. So, for example, we've done a Hollywood program that is based on Hulu. You can watch a program called East Los High, 24 episodes that dealt with teen pregnancy and obesity issues among American Hispanic teens. And it's video, of course, because that's what teens in America are consuming. And it became the #1 show on Hulu Latino as it rolled out in June, and we're now planning a second season. At the same time, in Mexico, we co-produced a 70-episode television serial drama with MTV Latin America, and that played in 18 countries in Latin America, also addressing teen pregnancy issues. In Africa, though, where much of our work is, we're focused on the use of radio, and we do a combination of media activities. In some countries, we have talk shows and magazine-style programs, but in all of these countries, we have long-running serialized dramas. And just think back to 1930s radio dramas in the US. In many sub-Saharan African countries, radio is still the dominant medium. People just cannot afford TV or they don't have a signal. So we're doing radio dramas, often 200, even 300 episodes long. We have a program right now on Radio Rwanda, where I was last week, that is 312 episodes long. And this gives us time to attract a huge audience, get them in love with the characters to the point that we get reports from listeners that they're naming their children after these characters. And then when these characters adopt such innovations as family planning, they have a huge influence on the audience.
Well, I know that one of the things, Bill, that you're talking about as far as the attitudes and behaviors, and this is something you're trying to influence. What would be kind of the list of the major attitudinal behavioral changes that you're trying to bring? Now, you talk about childhood pregnancy and family planning. What other kinds of things you're talking about? And then how do we tie that into both the environment and climate change issues?
All right. Well, we do multi-issue programming. So we address an array of issues of concern in each particular country. And we integrate these issues in a natural way, the way that all of us deal with multiple issues all the time in our own lives. So we do deal with teenage pregnancy, and indeed, in many countries, that means dealing with child marriage. There are 25,000 girls underage who are forced into marriage every day in the world. And these girls have no say in the matter and ultimately have no say in how many children they're going to have, and often end up not having any education after they're married. So trying to stop child marriage is a key issue. Also, encouraging people to use family planning to both delay and space childbearing and to limit childbearing is both key for maternal health and for the health of the children and the economic welfare of the family.
Can I ask you a question? I want to ask you about the Subito methodology, because this, I think, is really the most exciting aspect of your work. It's really, tell us a little bit about how your television serial dramas or your radio serial dramas, how do they really work to impact attitudes and behaviors?
Subito is a creator of television and now retired from Televisa, but he was a producer of television at Televisa, the biggest network in Mexico, when he created a methodology that we use to this day. And what's key about it is that it's highly entertaining, highly suspenseful programs, so that people become attracted to the programs and they can't wait to find out in each new episode what the resolution of the last cliffhanger was. So this engages people, and they find characters just like them struggling with problems similar to what they're struggling with. And in fact, we base these programs on extensive research in each country. And then these characters sort out conflicting advice from positive and negative characters, and then gradually evolve into positive role models so as not to create any backlash. One of the things we know from analyzing the demographic and health surveys around the world is that the reasons given for non-use of family planning are largely cultural and informational. People believe it's dangerous, people think their husband's opposed or their religion is opposed, or they don't think it makes any difference that God determines how many children you're going to have and there's nothing you can do about it. So getting people from these kinds of fatalistic attitudes to self-efficacy, believing they have the right and the ability to determine their own family life, is a key aspect of the role modeling that we create through these programs.
Bill, looking at the Subito method, thank you for sharing with us that extensive overview of what the Subito method is. Obviously, it's very important, but what types of changes are actually occurring in the countries where you're using this methodology, and how do you measure success?
This is a critical question. Number one, we do baseline and post-broadcast national surveys, often 3,000 people randomly selected across the country, hour-long face-to-face interviews. We also get health service providers to ask clients what motivated their visit to the clinic and to give us the data on numbers. And we also do extensive qualitative research, focus group discussions, and in-depth interviews with people before and during the program. So, for example, in Ethiopia, we're now about to start our 8th radio serial drama. Our first one was listened to by 46% of the population on a regular basis, and it modeled HIV testing at the request of the government and family planning use. In the Endline survey, we found male listeners reported going for HIV testing at 4 times the rate of non-listeners. Female listeners reported going for testing at 3 times the rate of non-listeners. Married women who were listening increased from 14% use of contraception at the baseline to 40% by the end of the program. There was a slight increase among non-listeners, but it was less than half the increase among listeners. Similarly, in northern Nigeria, we had 72% of the population listening at least weekly to our second program there. At 11 clinics that asked clients why they had come to the clinic, 67% of the family planning adopters named our program, and that translated into a cost per family planning adopter of the entire program and all the research and all the airtime of 208 episodes to 89 cents per family planning adopter. So it's a highly cost-effective strategy because it reaches so many people at once and motivates so many people at once to adopt new behaviors.
Well, Bill, we're about out of time. I didn't want to cut you off because that was really the next question I was going to ask you, the success. You enumerated it, but we only have literally about 10 seconds for you. What do you see for the long-term vision for the Population Media Center? It's got to be quick.
Naturally, from our standpoint, growth of this organization to cover more countries of the world is critically important for achieving long-term global sustainability. So we're very much determined to expand our work beyond the countries where we're working so far.
Well, thank you very much. This is William Bill Ryerson, who is the president, Population Media Center. Also, he's the chairman and CEO of the Population Institute. And sitting in with me is Bob Walker as we create the Emerald Planet.
Make sure you don't lose Bill. He's the next segment.
I know. Well, these are
Por más de 35 años,
The Hispanic Committee of Virginia has been serving our community.
el Comité Hispano de Virginia ha estado sirviendo a nuestra comunidad.
Job training and placement,
Capacitación, ayuda para conseguir trabajo,
education for children and adults,
educación para niños y adultos,
immigration, naturalization, and medical referrals
ayuda para los procesos de inmigración y naturalización y orientación sobre médicos
are a small part of what we do.
son solo una pequeña parte de lo que hacemos.
For help, information, or to volunteer,
Para ayuda, información o para ofrecerse como voluntario,
contact the Hispanic Committee of Virginia,
comuníquese con el Comité Hispano de Virginia,
helping everyone participate more fully in American society.
ayudando a todos a participar plenamente en la sociedad norteamericana.
Would you notice if you were missing half your kidney function? According to the National Kidney Foundation, 20 million people have chronic kidney disease and 20 million more may be at risk and not even know it. Anyone with high blood pressure, diabetes, or family history of chronic kidney disease is at risk. Early diagnosis is vitally important. To get the whole story, talk to your doctor and visit the National Kidney Foundation at kidney.org or call for a free brochure. Because when it comes to chronic kidney disease, you might not know the half.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Hancock, a President and Executive Director of Emerald Planet and the Emerald Planet TV, as we come to you weekly around the globe to talk about the 1,000 best practices, the technologies, the services, and the products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And as we look around the globe in 144 different nations, we're looking at those critical issues that are actually challenging nation states and the people within those countries, and also the rapid population expansion as we add 2 billion new people by 2050. And so we have an expert that's coming in to talk with us. He's coming by Skype from New York City via Africa, actually. He's been in a number of countries over there. This is William Bill Ryerson, who is the president of the Population Media Center and also the chairman, CEO of the Population Institute. And sitting in case we lose Bill by Skype is Robert Bob Walker, who is the president of the Population Institute of Washington, D.C. So Bill, welcome. I know that you're suffering a little jet lag, but thank you for joining us on the Emerald Planet to talk about this important issue of population and child spacing and population control. So give us just a short overview, because this is its own standalone show, of the Population Media Center, and what is the connection with the Population Institute?
Population Media Center is an organization that works through entertainment media to influence behavior through role modeling of characters in long-running serialized dramas on primetime radio and television in various countries around the world. And we model such goals as daughter education, the use of family planning, HIV prevention, environmental protection, and protection of children. At the same time, Population Institute works with entertainment, or rather with the news and information media, and with various leadership groups such as members of the U.S. Congress, parliamentarians around the world, decision makers within the UN who are looking at global sustainability issues, and others. And Population Media Center serves as in a sense, the parent organization of Population Institute, even though Population Institute is a much older organization. I started my career at the Institute in the 1970s, just 2 years after it was founded in 1969. But the board of Population Media Center elects the board of the Population Institute, so we have a very close working relationship, but they are two distinct organizations.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because it's very important to understand the role of these organizations, because you are global in your reach. You know, there's 196 nations identified through the United Nations, and then there are about another 14 or 15 territories around the globe being represented in the United Nations as well. But in these LDCs, least developed countries, the population is continuing to expand, in some cases at a very rapid rate. So what is the Population Media Center doing to address this issue of population and the pressures that it's putting on natural resources base, and then the basic necessities as far as food, water, and power within these various countries?
Yeah, this rapid growth and very large family size that one finds in countries like Niger and the countries I've just been in, Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda, are major contributors to the poverty that one finds there. And so we are focused on modeling the benefits of delaying childbearing until adulthood, spacing of childbearing and limiting of childbearing through family planning. And we do this in part because, in large part, because the primary reasons given for non-use of family planning around the world, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, have to do with misinformation about its safety and cultural factors such as religious or male opposition or fatalism. So we're addressing those proximate major barriers to family planning use through these programs where characters in these entertainment programs discover the truth about the benefits of using family planning.
Well, looking at the issues related to family planning and really the status and treatment of females, this is all interrelated, as we're well aware.
Absolutely.
And so what else can your center do as far as to address these issues, as far as the status and role and importance of women in all these LDCs, least developed countries, at the same time to allow them to be able to enjoy and take advantage of the natural resources and the benefits of being within these societies without being burdened with this continued number of children and the loss of income and the loss of environmental and economic empowerment.
You're talking about a complex of issues that affect the quality of life in many of these countries. And so we, in fact, address these issues in an integrated way in the programs. Very importantly, we create characters that men will identify with because men are often the decision makers in many families. So we want to get men to understand the benefits of educating their daughters, of allowing their women to have equal roles within the family and within the community. We also address environmental issues. So for example, in Rwanda, a program of 312 episodes that's currently on Radio Rwanda in reruns addresses family planning, HIV prevention, sustainable coffee farming, and reforestation, all simultaneously through 4 settings that exist in that serial. And indeed, we measured impacts in each of those areas. For example, 24%, when we first broadcast it, 24% of women seeking antiretrovirals to prevent mother-to-child transmission cited that program as the reason they had come to the clinic. And at the same time, 11% of people buying tree seedlings named the program as the motivation to buy tree seedlings for reforestation.
So what you're seeing, Bill, then is really there's a direct correlation between what you're doing through the Population Media Center and this notion as far as family planning, child spacing, and how people, their attitudes and their willingness to become involved in protecting environment and also enhancing the local environment within their communities.
Yeah, critical to changing the direction many countries are headed in is changing the whole concept of self-efficacy and collective efficacy. That is, people have the right and the ability to determine where their society is going, but many people in developing countries are fatalistic and just wait to see what's going to happen and hope for the best, but indeed don't feel they have the ability or the right to take action. So one of the things we're modeling is having that ability and right, and showing people how to have discussions about this and then how to move forward in taking action.
Bill, your programs have had a lot of success. But obviously when you put on a program, a 2-year running serial drama, an awful lot goes into that. What kinds of challenges do you face in putting together a program that's really going to be a success in the country?
For Americans, you would think the biggest challenge would be getting on the air, but we find in most countries it's actually very easy because of the quality of our programs to get them on the air. They're often the top-rated shows on the air. The biggest difficulty we have is finding funding, a combination of donor support and commercial underwriting to make the programs possible in the first place.
Bill, looking at the entertainment media, you're talking about the success, the penetration rate, the market share within these various societies, and that's very successful. But share with us about the cost efficiency of reaching out through such multimedia and mixed multimedia, since you're using TV, internet, radio, and also the other social networking media.
Yes, and cell phones. We find that using long-running strategies like long-running serial dramas is actually more cost-effective on a per behavior change basis than short-term interventions. I often say if public service announcements and billboards were effective, Nigeria would have the health indicators of Norway by now. But indeed, what we find is that if you take the time to do it right, attract a huge audience, get them involved emotionally with what's going on, and then move them at a pace that's believable and understandable, you can have a much bigger impact. So indeed, these programs are highly cost effective. For example, our program in northern Nigeria, 208 episodes of prime time across 4 states, cost per person who adopted family planning and attributed it to the program 89 cents per adopter.
I tell you, that's absolutely incredible to think for 89 US cents that you can have that kind of impact, because the return on investment, if you want to look at it in economic terms, is in thousands of dollars per family, but it's in tens of millions of dollars per each of these societies. So it's just incredible the impact you're having. One of the things, child marriage, this is something that came up in conversation earlier, has a tremendous negative impact as far as the high fertility rates and population expansion. So what is the Population Media Center doing to help reduce and maybe hopefully even eliminate the pressures for child marriage in many of these societies?
Certainly, in some of the societies we're working in, there is pressure to maintain the right of men to marry young girls. So we're trying to change social attitudes about this issue across a broad swath of the society. For example, again, to mention northern Nigeria, it is not uncommon for girls to be placed into marriage at age 9 or 10. At that age, they're being brought up by their husbands while they're being raped every night. They have no concept that they have their own rights. They are denied education. They are denied access to the outside world. So indeed, reaching men and women of all ages to make them understand that this is a route to poverty, poor health, unemployment of the children is critically important.
Bill, we're going to lose you, and thank you for being with us. This is William Bill Ryerson, who is president of the Population Media Center and chairman of the Population Institute. And sitting right beside me is his colleague and good friend, Robert Bob Walker, who is the president of the Population Institute. And we'd like to thank you for being with us as we talk about this important topic to create the Emerald Planet. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Sam.
Good job.